Hi there, this is a special holiday edition of Power and Politics. I'm David Cochrane. We are counting down the top 5 Canadian political stories of the year. Which headlines had Canadians talking the most or drove the news agenda? We've got a special power panel here to look back at what's dominated the year's news cycle. Here with me in Ottawa is Vandana Cotter. She's a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Kate Harrison is a Conservative political analyst. Matthew Dubé is a former NDP MP. And Rob Benzie is the Queen's Park Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. Good to see you all. Happy holidays. Let's get started. Ranking at number 5 amongst our top stories for 2024.
Canada has provided credible, irrefutable evidence of ties between agents of the government of India and a murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil.
It is absolutely unacceptable.
Homicides, plural. Extortions, plural. Acts of violence against Canadians, acts of intimidation.
It is obvious that the government of India made a fundamental error in thinking that they could engage in supporting criminal activity against Canadians here on Canadian soil.
Indian government interference in Canadian politics is number 5 in our top political stories, with allegations of murder and those tit-for-tat diplomatic expulsions making headlines this year. Kate, when you're in government and you expect to deal with many things, it is not extrajudicial assassinations and transnational repression, but that is what the government of Canada has had to deal with here.
Yeah, indeed. And, there's a significant Indian diaspora community in Canada, so there's obviously a domestic political consideration here, not just the actions, the alleged actions of the Indian government. Considering the government and the Liberals right now really need to make a domestic political case for their survivability, this had the potential to serve as a bit of a distraction. I think you can say that the Prime Minister acted conclusively on this matter. I do think there's going to be a long tail. We see parliamentary committees continuing to study Indian interference, foreign interference more broadly. We're still waiting for another update on Justice Hogue's report, which is more about electoral interference broadly. I do not think this story ends in 2024, and it's something that the government and other political parties are going to have to be contending with heading into 25.
It definitely won't end in 24, Matthew. May not end in 25, right? I mean, there's indictments and arrests in the United States, here in Canada, the continuing diplomatic challenges. What are your thoughts on number 5 here?
Well, it's quite egregious, obviously, and I agree with everything Kate said. And I would add the possibility, we'll have a new president sworn in the United States. The Americans are obviously a key player here because there was allegations of situations happening across the border as well that impacted Canada and Canadians. And then obviously there's the very real possibility of a change in the federal government here in Canada as well. So how does that impact that relationship? It'll be quite something to watch. India is a huge country. It's a major economic player. And as Kate also mentioned, there's a huge diaspora community here. And we've seen tensions flare as well as part of this, and how that gets navigated by political leaders whose voices and words matter in that instance, and how those communities interact with each other, and how it impacts public safety, for example, is something that'll be really important to watch over 2025.
Vandana, it's remarkable that when foreign interference burst onto sort of the political agenda in a massive way, it was all about China, nominations, in the back corridors of elections through subtle interference, and now India is front and center with violence and allegations of murder.
Yeah, I think that'd be a surprise to the mainstream. I think a lot of us who follow Indian politics, a lot of the diaspora community themselves would say this has been coming. I've been dealing with some issues about this since I was in the Prime Minister's office. Requests from agents saying they can't have a Punjab pavilion at a Caribram event, for example. So this has been on the upside. I think it is, to whatever everyone's point here, is that it's going to shift how we deal with India. India is, again, to what Kate and Matthew said, huge diaspora here, huge people ties, as well as a huge economic country with a lot of opportunities for Canada and India from a business side of things. So one thing I've actually read from this piece from Ben Rhodes said in Foreign Affairs, that sometimes we have to shift how we think about these countries that may have been allies in the past. So So Mr. Modi has been clear that he has very clear views on what extremism is to India, what is a threat to India, and he has not shifted on that. I have been dealing with this government when I was in Prime Minister's office, and they won't shift on these things, right?
No.
So we now have to evaluate how we engage with them. So I don't think this ends in 2025. I think it's something that you'll see as long as Prime Minister Modi is in government.
Well, and Benzie, that's the challenge, right? Because sort of the Western nations were all counting on Modi to be this counterweight to China, and he may still be that because of the moral scales of geopolitics and how those things work. But domestically, agents of the Indian government being linked to these crimes is an untenable situation for Canada.
No, it's not tenable, David. And Vandana and Matthew and Kate are bang on. There are 1 in 25 Canadians is of Indian descent. 1 in 50 Canadians is of Sikh descent. So you have this really complicated political dynamic here at home. But to put it in context, can you imagine, David, if there were quote unquote Quebec separatists living in New Delhi and the RCMP was assassinating them because they were seen as a threat to Canada back home because we were concerned about Quebec secession? Well, this is sort of what India is alleged to have done. They're concerned about Khalistani separatists, and they're assassinating them on Canadian soil. And this is a really shocking crime, and I think. And Vandana is right. It's not shocking to people in the diaspora community. I mean, near where I live, I'm in Toronto, but in Brampton, that is the tensions are visible on the streets of that city, one of the biggest cities in Ontario, between different diaspora communities against this backdrop. It's a very, very shaky situation, a very troubling situation.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to be on countdown list in 2025 as well. Okay, that's our number 5 pick for top stories of the year. Which story ranks number 4 out of our top 5 political stories? Stick around and find out. That one's next. Welcome back to the special holiday edition of Power and Politics. Today, we're taking you through the top 5 political news stories in Canada this year. So far, we have at number 5, Indian foreign interference. Now, for number 4.
Canadians have economic whiplash. It has been a really hard time.
High inflation and interest rates have been a heavy burden.
We are making life cost less.
Conservatives will vote against this wasteful, inflationary budget.
We know that middle-class families need a break.
Carbon tax is the worst tax.
It's a weight that Canadians can't bear.
They can lower the cost of food, of gas, of home heating by canceling the increase.
This policy is wrong.
We have to be sure that housing supply keeps up.
And now we're going to be able to give a tax break for all Canadians.
A 2-month temporary tax trick.
The runway's in sight, but we still need to land this.
The cost of living crisis is our number 4 political story of 2024. It dominated the political discourse this year and drove the political agenda. The Power Panel is back with Rob Benzie, Matthew Dubé, Vandana Cotter, and Kate Harrison. Vandana, it's an interesting issue because it's kind of been a good news, bad news story on that, and that inflation is down, interest rates are coming down, but cost is still high because of the price increases are baked in, and it's sideswiping governments everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those weird situations where all macroeconomic indicators show that the economy's better, but people just aren't feeling it, right? I hear it from moms groups, I hear it from friends of mine who it's mainly at the grocery store, just feeling that, it's really hard to keep up. And, I think governments, and I'm seeing this, around the world, it's been a global issue, that current governments are having issues tackling that. That they're saying the things, but people aren't feeling what they're feeling. They feel like it's not authentic. They feel like, what are you doing for me? Like, if grapes were $10 today, to some people that's fine, but to some moms, that's a big shift for them and a huge issue to their bank account. And I think the current government has done things like the GST vacation, hoping for something small to help people during the holidays. I have seen people sharing, what's on as soon as the weekend happened, like, here's what's happening, like, buy your books, buy your things for your kids, etc. But the question is, how do you keep it for longevity, right? How do we make Canadians feel that, they feel supported and that there can be an end to this thing?
Matthew, the Liberals were kind of slow to respond to this. The Conservatives were quick to jump on it, and it's derailed like signature policy items like carbon pricing for the government and created problems for provincial governments too.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of, passing the buck back and forth between the federal government and the provinces. I think this is a big story for 2024 namely because it's the thing that eclipses all other issues for the majority of the Canadian electorate, I think. Everyone's talking about who's going to handle Donald Trump and how and big stories like that, but I think at the end of the day, this remains the dominant issue. I mean, it so often is going into an election, but particularly at this time. I also think, speaking from my corner of the house, if you will, the other reason it had an impact is I think it's one of the motivators from NDP leader Jagmeet Singh and his caucus to want to tear up the supply and confidence agreement with the government because of, as you mentioned, that slowness to get in front of this issue was starting to weigh them down in what traditionally should be a strong issue for New Democrats. We'll obviously see in 2025 if that helps them recover in any way in the polls, but I think wanting to stand apart on this issue was part of what motivated that decision.
Right. And Benzie, it was a big issue in the U.S. election too, right? Like, no carbon pricing, not Tiff Macklem, but, a cost of living and affordability because of all the global factors driving up food prices and things down there. Inflation is a government killer, and that's proving to be the case again and again and again.
Yeah, and David, not just in the United States, we saw in the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak's Conservatives were wiped out by Keir Starmer's Labour Party. And look, I mean, there are lots of factors that went into Trump winning, but cost of living, I think, was top of mind for folks. If a box of Cheerios costs so much more in Michigan than it did 4 years ago, you notice that. And Vandana is bang on. It's the grocery store where you really, really feel it because we all go to the Metro or the Loblaws or whatever, and you're at the cash register and you have a mental tally in your head of what it's going to be, and then you're like, wow, $95, I can carry this in one bag. So. It's happened to me the other day, actually. Yeah. So it is kind of it is a jarring thing, and it's a government killer, and it doesn't matter whether it's the United States, the United Kingdom, or potentially here in Canada in 2025.
Yeah, Kate, I can get $95 in one bag because they sell wine in grocery stores now, and that is tax-free for a limited time only.
David,
but
for 2 months.
Yeah, it's easing off, right? And that's a good thing in terms of inflation. But that's the consequence of monetary policy. But on the other side of that, unemployment is going up. Growth is going down. The calibration of an economy is a difficult task. Yeah, and I'm thinking about it particularly in terms of the impact on youth, because youth unemployment has been persistently high. You see the bigger number, in the most recent reporting. But youth are really, really struggling with the cost of living. I think it's difficult to separate housing from this conversation as well, availability, affordability of it. Yeah. And I believe about 70% of the population identify either the cost of living or the housing issue as their top issues. A lot of the challenge here is, I think, Prime Minister Trudeau has lost credibility in communicating effectively on economic matters. The polling I've seen suggests the Conservatives own that territory, and the NDP actually outperform the Liberals when it comes to messaging around the economy. It's very difficult to get that back. I don't think the holiday will do that. Perhaps for some it addresses some short-term pain, but there's a bigger credibility issue here, I think, for the Prime Minister in terms of being able to regain that economic narrative. Perhaps a new finance minister provides an opportunity to turn the page. I am a bit skeptical. It's the challenge on that, though, Kate. Like, even Donald Trump, who ran on this, said afterwards, it's going to be tough to bring down the price of groceries, right? Because as powerful as governments can be, there's so many factors that go into it that it's tough to solve. Yeah, there's no silver bullet. Yeah. I think it can be helped by painting a clear picture about what you're doing to control spending. The government is not doing that with a $21 billion additional deficit on top of the 40 that was announced in the fall economic statement. I also think that this issue has become harmonious with the carbon tax. Now, we can debate how real or not the impact is on people's day-to-day affordability and cost of living, and particularly grocery prices. But where the Conservatives have had success this year, in my view, is marrying those issues together. The impact of the carbon tax on the cost of living, that is not going to be helped by a planned increase in April. Yeah, and Vandana, that is a challenge on this, right? Because, Trevor Toome and others have done studies. Carbon tax doesn't really affect things as much as people would argue politically, because there is the rebate, and the inputs into basic food prices has more to do with distance and climate change and supply chains and the war in Ukraine and these things. But that's a real long explanation that requires footnotes and charts that people just see their bill and they get mad.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where people are like, yeah, I hear all that. How are you going to help me, though? You know, people can understand the war, people can understand all that, and you can hear the carbon tax is not inflationary, but now it's like the question is it baked into Canadian psyche, right? Yeah. And then that's the problem. It's hard to take out those levers at that point. But I think it comes from, you know, when you govern, one of the issues I found when I was there is that, you know, you have all these issues coming at you over and over again. So you have COVID, you know, we had, you know, at that same year we had Wet'suwet'en, and we had COVID. We had COVID too, and we thought COVID was not that bad, but now it's actually really bad. Exactly. You know? That too, I remember. And then it's hard, you're focused on these things, and all these other things are coming through and percolating that it's hard to governments just pick up on because you're driving a big ship and it's hard to move quickly. So what happens, I think, you know, yes, a new finance minister could help turn the page, something fresh, but some new ideas, and also just authentic speaking and saying, and you know, Kate brings up a good point to youth. I have a lot of friends who are younger than me who say, you know, I don't actually plan to buy a house. There's no point. Yeah. And that hopelessness. So how do you counter that? And I think they really have to think through, how do we show that? And what is the vision for the future?
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing. And even if you can give a credible technical explanation why you're not the cause of the problem, they want you to come with a solution. And if you can't do that, that's where it's going to be trouble.
What have you done for me lately?
Okay, that's number 5. And number 4, which story ranks number 3 amongst our top 5 political stories of the year? Stick around and find out. That's next. Welcome back to this special holiday edition of Power and Politics. Today we're taking you through the top 5 political news stories of 2024. So far, we have at number 5, Indian foreign interference. At number 4, the cost of living. Now, let's get to number 3.
The next Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Poilievre.
Life wasn't like this before Justin Trudeau, and it won't be like this after he's gone. And let me say how incredibly proud and even a little bit shocked I was that in the Liberal fortress of St. Paul's, the people voted for our common sense plan to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
What's been really interesting about the Conservative support growth is that it's coming from a wide range of parties.
They can't just throw him out. He can't just run away. They need to face the music. Why won't we have a carbon tax election now?
Your home, my home, our home. Let's bring it home.
Coming in at number 3, the Federal Conservative Surge. It's a party that was riding high this year with consistently stellar polling numbers and huge by-election victories. The Power Panel is back with Kate Harrison, Matthew Dubé, Vandana Cotter, and Rob Benzie. Kate, winning Toronto St. Paul, winning Langley, which we expected them to win, but by 50 percentage points and a persistent 20-plus lead in the polls. I mean, a pretty good year for an opposition party when they normally don't have them. Yeah, and sustainability and longevity is very hard in this current dynamic. And these poll numbers are sticky. They've been, consistently at least 15 or 16 points ahead. Some of the latest polling suggests that could be as high as 25 points ahead. So there is huge credit that should be given to the Conservatives for being able to maintain that volume of support. I don't know if it is so much a surge as opposed to the word you use, consistent, right? Yeah. This has been incremental growth. I think part of that is obviously fueled by dissatisfaction with the current government. But I also think that there's something broader to observe just around a realignment around policy and what Canadians want to see in terms of solutions for the various issues that we face. I think you see globally the election of more right-leaning governments and politicians. And I think that in many ways the pendulum is swinging back a bit more to the center or to the right in terms of what types of policies people want to see their governments implement. So I think that Conservatives have done a good job communicating both on the substance of issues, and we spoke about the cost of living. I think that they have really seized that, but also in taking advantage of a disorganized and chaotic government. Yeah, I mean, Benzie, there is the weakness and the difficulties that the Liberals are facing. The Liberals and the NDP will criticize the Conservatives for not having solutions, merely having slogans. Whatever that it means, it is not resonating with voters. It's been Pierre Poilievre and his team at number 1 all year.
Yeah, no, Kate's right, and it actually, David, you can chart their surge in the polls to rising interest rates. When the Bank of Canada started raising interest rates, after the pause, then Trudeau's Liberals, their numbers just started to plunge. Now, look, Bank of Canada has been lowering interest rates for the last few months, and it hasn't helped the governing Liberal Party. So I think Kate's right; it's baked in now. I covered the St. Paul's by-election. Noteworthy, David, that the only journalists at Don Stewart's headquarters that night were from the Toronto Star, the CBC, and Radio Canada. So not all of Mr. Poilievre's favorite outlets. Actually, Mr. Poilievre wasn't even there himself. But I talked to his folks that night. They were bullish, but they didn't think they were going to win. And remember, it wasn't until the pre-dawn hours that they finally they eked it out over Leslie Church, the Liberal candidate, in a riding that is a Liberal stronghold and should be a Liberal stronghold. And it's the kind of riding, you lose those ridings, you lose it in Montreal, the David Lamette's old seat. They are in big trouble, and I think they know that.
Yeah.
But are the Tories popular or are the Liberals unpopular? It's probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, I remember it was the public broadcasters and the Star there, because we got those personal invitations from the Conservatives to come to their headquarters. Matthew, your thoughts on this? I mean, the Liberals have been struggling. The NDP have not benefited from it. It's been the Bloc to some degree in Quebec, but the Conservatives in all of Canada.
Yeah, and I think the Bloc benefits from some of these vote splits. Like a lot of folks on the ground in the by-election in Montreal will tell you that the Conservatives grew very incrementally. They were a non-factor, but they were a factor in the end because everything they hived off from the Liberals allowed, the Bloc to sort of squeak through there, and it was a three-way race, say that 10 times fast, between the NDP, the Liberals, and the Bloc. So it'll be interesting come the next election how that dynamic plays out in places where, you think of like downtown Toronto or Montreal, for example. Does that play out a little bit differently, where the Conservatives are strong enough to eat support from the Liberals, but not necessarily in traditional spaces? It'll be interesting to see, but I think ultimately it's a trend against incumbency, right? I think a lot of what Kate said is true. The one point where I would disagree is, you see a Susan Holt defeating Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick. You see Scott Moe's support lowering, even though, he doesn't seem to be going anywhere, notwithstanding. In France, the centre got blown up, but the left also did well as the right. And then obviously the UK example where we see Labour having defeated a Conservative government there. What'll be interesting to watch is, if everything plays out the way the polls seem to indicate, is how long does that trend sustain itself afterwards? What's the honeymoon look like, right, if there's a hypothetical Conservative government?
Yeah, I think of some of those provincial issues, it was more a loss of focus on the main thing. Like Blaine Higgs was focused on everything except affordability and housing. Scott Moe got distracted by gender policy, so the cities rejected him. And the UK Conservatives, I mean, what can you say about them? But, Vandana, the Canadian Conservatives, to continue my point, they have focused relentlessly, on the four things, right? The Acts Tax, Build a Home, Stop the Crime, Fix the Budget, and they add in other things for there. But that has been the secret sauce.
Yeah, I mean, message discipline is so important, and any party that wants to take these on, you need to keep that. One thing that we've said, when we were in opposition, is the reason we say middle class all the time is because people have to hear it 100 times before they hear it the first time, right? I think to kind of Kate and Matthew's point is that I do think it's more change rather than right policies, but I also think about when people think, what is not working for me? Okay, maybe a change will work for me. I think from the by-elections, we can't ignore the fact that the war in Gaza did have a profound impact as well, and the rise of anti-Semitism as well as anti-Palestinian racism, and people again feeling a little bit helpless, wanting to have more response from the government, and the government doesn't always have the levers to respond the way that people want to. But it has been something that has been dogging the government, obviously, because as you govern, other issues are coming up. They're trying to catch up now, but again, message discipline and trying to re-engage with the public and say, I know this is important for you, and trying to pull that back from Pierre Poilievre, because I don't think this is more of a Pierre Poilievre love-in, but it's just a desire for change. Go ahead.
No, he read the mood, turned it into policy, and turned it into messaging, and that's what's mattered. Just quickly.
There are just two points I would make on that. On two issues, the Conservatives, I think, have managed to change public opinion and the narrative on these. The carbon tax is one, and you saw Liberal premiers start backing away from it, and I think that is in no small part because of Pierre Poilievre and because Canadians have grown tired of that policy. The second one is safe supply. You have really seen the public discourse around safe supply and injection sites change, and I think that is a result of Conservative advocacy.
It's interesting, though, the death rate in Alberta and in Saskatchewan it's higher than it is in British Columbia, which is the one they're targeting on that, right? So you get into the nitty-gritty of it. that's a tough policy.
People-
I agree with the changing of the mood.
Yes,
though.
and,
No
and
opinion.
there's a public safety impact, I think, that people see
the disorder
as very
thing
real.
for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, quick last 30 seconds.
I was just going to say that on that, I think people still want action on climate change, right? Maybe the carbon tax seems unpopular, they're not sure, they don't see the actual, like, how does it affect today or climate, extreme weather events today. So I think people still want those things. And on safe supply, I think it's complex. I think people just get irritated seeing what's happening on the streets, but they know that it's a core issue that it's still going to exist. So we need more mental health facilities. We need more of a diversified way of affecting those. But again, these are not issues that are main for the public, but people have to address them.
Okay, there's a lot to talk about there. We've got to move on to our next pick, because our number 2 story in our top 5 political news stories of 2024.
I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president.
This is a relationship that we know takes a certain amount of working on, and that's what we'll do.
If we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, no, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay.
I think we need to make sure that we are prepared and that we continue to keep our alliances strong.
We can't have open borders. And I said to the president of Mexico and to Justin Trudeau, if it doesn't stop, I'm going to put tariffs on your country.
It's like a family member stabbing you right in the heart.
We need a plan to put Canada first.
Hundreds and thousands of Canadian jobs are at risk.
This is a moment when Canada needs to be united.
We have a great relationship. I have so many friends in Canada, but we shouldn't have to subsidize a country.
At number 2, we have Donald Trump's return to the White House, a U.S. story, but a story that will make headlines in Canada over the next 4 years. And Matthew, it has already reoriented federal politics, provincial politics, the focus of the economy, the border immigration, everything. The disruptor in chief is on his way back to the White House.
Yeah, ever since Trump has been elected, it feels like I get a notification on my phone from a Canadian news source telling me about something ridiculous that he said about the Prime Minister, about the country.
The governor, you mean, of the 51st state of Canada.
Of course, I've got to get my facts straight there. It's definitely upended the apple cart, and I think it's something that generates attention. And I think it feels a bit different than last time in 2016, where there seems to be a bit more panic amongst the political Canadian class, and I think that's true federally, provincially, and across parties. It might be manifesting differently, but I think there's a little more uncertainty this time about how it's going to go. I mean, I think last time there was challenges for sure. I think for all intents and purposes, it went relatively smoothly, but there was definitely some hiccups at the beginning. You can't discount these threats. And I mean, even from, I think Trump's base in the U.S. has hardened quite a bit. I think he's hardened quite a bit. And I mean, in theory, unless something happens in the next 4 years, this will be his last, run in the White House, right? So,
in theory, yes.
In theory, I recognize. But I mean, look, so there's, in some ways, you're almost emboldened in that respect, right? Like the norms that have already gone out the window with this man have even more so this time. So it'll be interesting to see how folks react, but it's undoubtedly been impactful. That being said, I think we can't overstate, how important the domestic issues remain in the minds of the Canadian electorate.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but Kate, he is going to, if the tariffs go up, I mean, the ability to respond to domestic challenges is going to be eliminated, right? And there's this panic, as Matthew said, because the federal government's in a much weaker position, but also we have seen Trump in action and MAGA in action from January 6th, and the moderates are gone now, so who knows where he goes.
Yeah, the big thing that I think has changed and shifted is the goodwill Canadians have for our current government. That is something they benefited from in 2016, and there was a lot of trust in the government's ability to manage that relationship. Now it's clear that Canadians, for them, that trust has deteriorated. Really difficult to predict where this is going to go. I do not think that all of these problems are solved by a change in government, because Trump has a domestic political audience to contend with, and populists to make happy there. And I don't think that it will be a simple matter of changing leaders. What I do think is that trying to run against Trump, as the Trudeau government has really since the beginning of this year, until November 5th, when it became clear that that was not going to be a smart decision, has not helped. And so putting in the same players for a different game is not a winning solution.
But Vandana, Kate's right on something there, that the push for the election to deal with Trump. I understand the political motivation of that, but if it is Prime Minister Poilievre, the belief of a $100 billion subsidy because of trade deficits doesn't go away. The sort of contempt for the country because of those things doesn't go away. The challenge is in the White House, no matter who's in the PMO.
Yeah, Trump needs his political wins, and he has his audience. I don't think he cares who's in charge. I think whether it was Mr. Poilievre as Prime Minister or Mr. Trudeau, he'll still troll all of us. That's what he's going to do. He likes to cause disruption. He likes to get a reaction. That's how he is. I think the best way forward is really continue, I think, with Mr. LeBlanc there. I think he's one of the best people to manage those politics and engage with those people on the Trump administration side, and still work through diplomacy, and trying to make the case that this is not going to benefit your economy, and we will take actions to that. So that's the best way forward. I think the change in government, again, I think just causes more disruption, but it's an easy political tool to pull at.
But Rob, it's been interesting how it's affected the guy you cover all the time, because I don't remember the cabinet shuffle, but Premier Doug Ford is also now the Minister of International Trade and Foreign Affairs somehow, and chief spokesperson for Canada on U.S. cable networks.
Yes, he's everywhere on CNN, Fox, CNBC. But of course, remember, Vandana mentioned Dominic LeBlanc. Dominic LeBlanc and Doug Ford are tight. Yeah. Now, Doug Ford's favorite person in Justin Trudeau's cabinet was Chrystia Freeland. Ford was not happy when Freeland left and how she left. He was very unhappy about that. But he is tight with Mr. LeBlanc as well. And I think the two of them will be able to sing from the same sort of song sheet because they have the same interests, after all. Ontario depends on U.S. trade more than any other province, $500 billion a year between this province and the United States alone. And if there are 25% tariffs on January 20th or 21st, this province will hurt more than any other province. But I think the one thing, David, first of all, I think two things. Donald Trump is 78 years old. He's not going to run again. The Constitution doesn't allow him to run for a third term, so he will not run in 2029 or whatever, or 2028. But I also think he's in a little bit of a lame duck situation, because he's going to put these tariffs. Let's say he does put the tariffs on. Canada retaliates. That's going to cause prices to rise in the United States for gasoline, for other kinds of goods. And then what happens? The midterm elections in 2026 in the United States, the Republicans get hammered. I mean, it's all cyclical. People are catastrophizing Trump so much right now, saying, "Oh my God, it's the end of the world. He's got both houses. He's got the Supreme Court. He is almighty and omnipotent." Well, he didn't even get 50% of the vote. He actually got fewer votes than he did in 2020 when he lost to Joe Biden. So I think we have to put it in context. It's going to be bad. It's going to be rough. And Kate is right that it's not going to all change if we have a change in government here in Canada. But it is not the end of the world.
Yeah, you say all of those things, Rob, and yet the country is spinning itself into a panic, and he's not even in office yet. This is
ridiculous. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, this is where it is. People want to spend billions of dollars on things to make you happy, and I feel like the response to this and the federal election, I'm going to look ahead to next year. Those are going to be number 2 and number 1 in some order, I think. Okay, we're going to take a break there, and we're going to tell you which story tops them all as the number 1 Canadian political story of 2024. Stick around and find out. That's next. Welcome back to this special holiday edition of Power and Politics. Today we're taking you through the top 5 political news stories of 2024. So far, we have at number 5, Indian foreign interference. At number 4, the cost of living. At number 3, the federal conservative surge. And at number 2, Donald Trump's return. Now for our top Canadian political story of the year.
Every leader, every party has a best before date. Our best before date is here.
I don't really pay attention to the polls.
It seems as though the electorate has tuned out.
Watching the Conservatives win in St. Paul means that, everything we're working on could be thrown in a trash bin.
If I listen to my constituents, yes, I have to say that we would have to change leadership.
Obviously, it's not what we expected as the outcome.
It's a tough loss for us.
Okay, Trudeau isn't perfect, but he's way better than Poilievre.
People have had enough. They've tuned him out, and they want him to go.
His caucus is revolting.
Have you seen the letter? I haven't seen the letter. What's the supposed letter?
To keep knifing like this, put up or shut up.
We're going to continue to have great conversations about what is the best way to take on Pierre Poilievre in the next election. But that'll happen with me as leader.
Chrystia Freeland this morning has decided to leave cabinet.
Mr. Trudeau's government is over.
Canadians are tuning him out.
The next steps are that he should resign.
Well, Justin Trudeau's political troubles, the top political story of this year. His finance minister resigned publicly on the day of the fall economic statement. The prime minister is facing call after call from within his own caucus to step aside as leader. He's lost multiple key by-elections and saw his governance agreement with the NDP crumble. The Power Panel is back on this. Kate Harrison, Matthew Dubé, Vandana Cotter, and Rob Benzie. Vandana, other than that, it's been a pretty good year.
Yeah, sure.
What do you think?
Oh, let's say okay. Listen, it's been a tough year for the government.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of tough issues this government has faced. You know, Trump 1, Trump 2, COVID, a war in Ukraine, war in Gaza. So a lot of things that are also taking away from being able to focus on the day-to-day issues of Canadians. Not that they're not focused on it, but even keeping up with the political feeling on the ground has been tough. It's been a tough week with everything happening with the finance minister, but having been to both the Laurier Club as well as the Liberal Christmas Party, I will say like it didn't feel like that, judging from his speech. He looked energized. He acknowledged that there were troubles happening, but he looked like he was full of like rigor and ready to set out and focus on a better next year. I know people who have been in touch with him and talking about, you know, what can we do next? How can we move forward? How do we engage with Canadians? How do we get through this? So my guess is that despite the bad year, that you know they're looking to a year of hopeful optimism and trying to get their footing properly.
Yeah, look, and as we're recording this, the Prime Minister, we presume, is still in his period of reflection, right? And Rob, we may not know exactly what he's going to do until in the new year. But you know what strikes me is you see the quotes coming from his own caucus, and these were the sort of things in the Martin Chrétien year were said to Ed Greenspan at the Globe and Mail anonymously. They're public, on camera, and almost daily now. It's an extraordinary time.
Yeah, I mean, it really does feel, notwithstanding the mood at the Christmas parties and so on, that he's a dead man walking. And I think, I mean, look, David, this time last year, I said that I thought that he would take a walk in the snow on February 29th, on the 40th anniversary of his father's walk in the snow in 1984, and then and leave with enough time for his party to rebuild. He has outstayed his welcome, and you've lost key by-elections in Toronto, in Montreal, in Langley. They are. There aren't very many safe Liberal seats. You talk to Liberal MPs privately. Yes, lots of them are saying stuff on the record, but the stuff they're saying privately is even worse. They are very worried about their own electoral futures. And I think this is something that the Prime Minister needs to take into account. It's not like Chrystia Freeland was Paul Martin to his Jean Chrétien. No. She was never an insidious
never a rival
person undermining him. No, never a rival. And remember, I covered her for her by-election in 2013 when she took a flyer on a young guy named Justin Trudeau, who was leading the third party, and a lot of people at that time thought Tom Mulcair of the NDP would be the one who would topple Stephen Harper's Conservatives, not Trudeau's third party Liberals. And she took a flyer, won that by-election, and gave him a lot of credibility, and was nothing but a loyal soldier the whole time. And for him to do what he did to her a few days before the fall economic statement, telling her in a Zoom call, I'm going to replace you with Mark Carney, and then Carney doesn't take the job. It is so appallingly incompetent and laughable. I mean, I'm actually astounded that someone who is as skilled at politics as Mr. Trudeau was bungled this so badly. It's incredible.
Kate, it's interesting that there is this parade of ex-ministers who have left for various reasons during Trudeau's time as Prime Minister who do not have kind things to say about him when they're out of politics. But you do have a lot of people still in the caucus right now who, like the Prime Minister, are personally loyal to the Prime Minister, but politically are just telling him to his face, it's over, man. You got to go, and here we are.
Yeah, and he's saying, la, la, la. Vandana spoke to the fact that there's all these issues that are happening, at home and abroad that are distracting the Liberal Party from managing their own affairs. Perversely, the reverse is true, where all of their internal affairs are leaving them unable or unwilling to act on the issues that people care about. And I think the big challenge, the parlor room politics of this, fun to discuss. But what are we communicating to Canadians about actually governing and taking care of the issues that they care about? What are we communicating to the incoming administration about the state of our affairs when this is the story, the disruption of the Liberal Party and the slow death of Justin Trudeau is what's occupying headlines? I think that that is a recipe for a lot of Canadians just tuning out of politics, getting very cynical about government, more so than they already are, because, you know, again, as fun as it is to discuss, there is a real seriousness here about whether or not this government is asleep at the switch at a time they need to be very much awake.
It's fun for you and the Conservative pundits who are on the show. I don't know about poor Vandana, but you know, Matthew, I mean, what's the New Democrat perspective on this?
Well, I think, you know, I won't sugarcoat it. I think there's some disappointment. I think that they haven't been able to carve out the support, you know, from the Liberals. It seems to have gone entirely one way. You know, you'll see different polls where it's margin of error, or it's tied, and certainly like there's some silver lining there. And you know, I mentioned earlier when we were talking about another story, maybe that'll play out in a positive way for the NDP in certain ridings in certain regions. But you know, I also think they're challenged in some other places that people forget are traditional NDP territory out west and things like that, where Trudeau's unpopularity and maybe having let the agreement go on ever slightly too long has maybe dragged them down a little bit. Yeah. That being said, I do think that there's opportunity still, right? It's new year, new me, as people like to say, and I you know.
Will that be Jagmeet Singh's slogan when he comes back?
We'll see.
Or maybe it's Justin Trudeau's.
I'm certainly not pitching it, and I suspect some might be displeased that I even put it out there. No, but all kidding aside, I think it's been, you know, I appreciate the external challenges and everything, but I do think the Prime Minister has been increasingly isolated, both in terms of the elected people around him, but also from, you know, the non-elected staff that are there as well. I think the dwindling circle, and you know, Rob outlined how the situation with Mr. Freeland, or former Mr. Freeland, played out. That is demonstrative of not getting good advice. To think that there was no thought that you're going to put someone in a role with no department, basically being a symbolic person there, and ask them to still do their job while you were firing them over a Zoom call, like everything just raises a bunch of red flags. And to think that no one took pause to say, we might want to consider that there might be other outcomes to this, like the one that we ended up seeing, I think is just, in a nutshell, what's been bogging down this Prime Minister, certainly over the last calendar year.
You know, Vandana, I know you worked for the Prime Minister. You were in his office for a considerable period of time and are friends with him. Yeah. I'm not going to ask you if you think he should quit. I want to know what you think he will do, because I don't want to put you on the spot to say that. But what do you think he's going to do? He's heard all of this. He said, you know, when they presented him with the letter, I'm going to reflect on it. And 24 hours later, he said, I'm staying. This is different with Chrystia Freeland, right? Like, this is a letter with her name and her signature and her criticism spelled out in a more powerful way. What do you think he does?
I think he stays. Yeah. For all that I know of him, all that I know, and having been in touch with him, I believe he stays. I think with Minister Freeland, I respect her decision. I understand why she did it. You know, this is unfortunately part of being in government. You serve at the pleasure. And I spoke at the Laurie Club event yesterday to a former minister who said, I didn't like being removed from cabinet. You serve at the pleasure. It's a risk you take. I've talked to another minister who's like, I didn't like my portfolio change, but you just do that. And it's unfortunate, but that is part of how it works. Doesn't mean that you're guaranteed that spot forever. I do agree that what they given her, now that being said, I know there's a whole other story that I haven't heard it yet. When I hear it, you know, maybe I'll feel differently, but if that was what was presented to her, I understand, right? I think he stays. I think, and the caucus, you know, a lot of caucus members said to me, like, well, what do you want us to do? I still want to be an MP. I don't want to resign as independent. I still believe in Liberal policies and Liberal Party. It's funny, my husband said, this is the biggest Christmas party I have been to. Like, you'd think it was a huge celebratory party, because the Liberal brand is still the Liberal brand, whether the Prime Minister is leading it of Justin Trudeau or not, or somebody else. So I think at the end of the day, people just, you know, are just going to let him do what he wants to do. The decision is with him, and his decision, for as far as I know, will be to stay.
Okay, I got 30 seconds left. How does it get better for him? Because it feels like it's going to be more of this until an election. It looks like they will lose.
You need to bring people in. Bring people in with a different perspective. Bring people in who've been on the outside and looking in to share it. Sometimes you need to pivot. You need to have someone share you what maybe you're not seeing, maybe you have some blinders on, and show to you what people need and give you some fresh new ideas of how to engage. The problem is when you are under attack, people become more insular. That's not the way. You need to bring in the whole new perspectives, maybe perspectives that you don't want to hear, and have them lead you that way.
Okay. We just in the quick time we have left, I just want to get your sense. Vandana says she thinks he stays. Benzie, stay or go? What do you think?
Vanda's right. Look, the only period of reflection Justin Trudeau ever seems to take is the reflection in the mirror. So I think he probably does stay because he's so delusional and narcissistic about it. But if he takes some time over this holiday break and actually thinks about it and looks, if he really does care deeply about the Liberal Party, he would leave.
Okay, Rob Benzie playing the role of Wayne Long in that segment. Just kind of a prediction, a stay or leave. Kate, what do you think?
I think he sticks around. There's no other alternative that is obvious today.
Matthew, what do you think?
I think it's the wrong choice, but I do think he stays as well.
Okay, that's interesting that everybody thinks it. That's my impression as well. I have no hard information on it, but nobody leaves the Prime Minister's office willingly, right? The question then is, like, if he stays, does everybody else leave? And
tune in 4 hours for a completely
exactly. When we scrap this show after his press conference happens, we'll see. We'll find out soon enough. We'll be talking about it here on Power and Politics with you in some capacity in the new year. I want to thank the Power Panel, Vandana Cotter, Kate Harrison, Matthew Dubé, and Rob Benzie. I'm David Cochrane. Thank you all for watching the special holiday edition of Power and Politics. More CBC News to follow right here on CBC News Network. Hope you're enjoying the holidays. We'll see you soon.